screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey listeners, welcome to the 196th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. How we doing today, Brian?
Pretty good. We're into the midst of January. We've had some cold days. Snow on the ground stuck around a long time.
Yeah, it's been so cold it hasn't melted. It's been a slow editing and recording few weeks for us. It's just been really busy for me, so I'm glad that we were able to gather and talk about a film that brings me great joy, Brian. The film that we are discussing today is the 2007 Disney animation live-action hybrid, Enchanted. So, Brian, remind me, you said you had seen this once before this past week?
That's right. So, pretty much back when it came out, I suppose a little after it came out, I think we rented it. Rented it from Blockbuster in like 2008. Or I guess it's from 2007, so maybe it was like late 2007. I feel like it was my senior year of high school, so I think it was in 2008.
Okay. I actually don't remember when I first saw it, to be quite honest. If I saw it in theaters, I can't remember, or if I just saw it on DVD afterwards. But it left a strong impression on me. It was a lot more funny and charming than I expected it to be, I gotta say. And it's one that's kind of stuck with me in some ways. And we can talk about some of those ways, actually, that I think it works well, and I think it has made me rethink some of the things it's commenting on. Mainly, I think it does a great job, and we'll kind of get into this, but both making fun of, but then honoring Disney fairy tale tropes and the ways that they're kind of old-fashioned, but kind of charming in their own way. I don't know. I think it's an interesting balance.
Right. I think it works the same way that Lost Skeleton of Cadavra works, where it's both making fun of a genre, but still being a solid example of that genre and like reminding you why you like that genre.
Right. I think that's spot on. Yeah.
And it works so much better than Disney's subsequent efforts to make things that are like, we're going to take everything you know about Disney and make fun of it, but also still sell it. And like, this is better than Wish. This is better than like all the princesses coming together in Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a word I might use to describe that phenomenon is postmodern, maybe. I don't quite understand what that word means. I feel like there's a lot of different ways you can use it, but whenever something is like very much commenting on an accepted art form and like reacting to it, I think of that as postmodern. So
yeah, it's like Scream.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So anyways, what is Enchanted? It is a 2007 film. And did you see who it was directed by, Brian?
Remind me.
Kevin Lima, who directed Tarzan, who directed a Goofy movie.
Oh my goodness. I did not know.
Yeah. So this film kind of had a long production history. So the script, Disney brought the script in either the late 90s or very early 2000s, several years before the movie ended up being released. And when they bought it, the initial screenwriter had it pegged as like a heavy PG-13, maybe a much more like adult focus, kind of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I think, to some extent. Like apparently it was going to be darker, and even this film ends up with some good humor that adults will get that kids might not get. But I think it the original script was going to push a lot harder on that. They had various efforts to cast the leads and sign a director that fell through. And then they had various rewrites of the script to try to make it more family friendly. And then finally they signed on Kevin Lima, and he apparently insisted on Amy Adams. So the agreement he came up with Disney was, you let me pick Giselle, I'll let you pick pretty much everybody else. And he really wanted Amy Adams. So this came out in 07, and the production of it was in 05 and 06. And Amy Adams was not the big name that she was yet, although she did have an Oscar nomination for a film called Junebug. But I think this is one of the movies that people point to of people realizing that Amy Adams was the real deal. So what do you know Amy Adams from, Brian?
Well, this is definitely what I think of as her breakout. I know Arrival. I watched that one. Wasn't there also like a Irish Leap Day rom-com thing that she was into?
Probably. That sounds right. She's got like a ridiculous number of Oscar nominations. It's like 5 or 6 or something like that. Let me see if I can figure this out here. List of awards and nominations received by Amy Adams. All right, so she has 6 Oscar nominations. Junebug, Doubt, The Fighter, The Master, American Hustle, and Vice. And she did not win any of those. Oddly, no Arrival there. Wow. She wasn't nominated for Arrival. She's really good in Arrival.
Yeah, I like Arrival. We've talked maybe once or twice a little bit about Arrival. And that one, like, I got so interested in the idea of talking to the aliens that I was out for the twist. Like, the movie kind of collapses in on itself because it gets into, like, time loop stuff. And it's like, I don't care about that. I want to focus on first contact and the logistics of talking to aliens.
I kind of agree. I think it wants to do 2 things.
I don't want it to be so personal to this one character also. Like, suddenly the whole universe is about this character. It's like, well, no, that's not what I was hoping would happen.
Yeah, because it's like really intriguing and well done. Is like a procedural mystery. Like, how are they going to get the language decoded? And then, yeah, it gets spiritual, let's say. I think it's an awkward pivot. Although I know a lot of people who call it like one of their favorite movie endings or whatever. But I still haven't really said what Enchanted is. So the premise of Enchanted is, what if a Disney princess went to the real world? What would happen? And so the way that this is framed is we start with a 2D animation, cel-shaded animation segment that then pivots to a live action comedy set in New York City. And so there's a lot of stuff that's kind of cool and funny and charming here. So first of all, this opening segment, hand-drawn animation, Disney wasn't doing too much of it after this, Brian. So this came out in 07. To my knowledge, the only 2 feature films that had significant cel-shaded 2D animation after this were The Princess and the Frog and then the Winnie the Pooh movie. But and this is also like a fairy tale paradigm, like a kind of classic. It's homaging basically every princess movie that Disney ever made. The big ones are Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, I would say. A lot of Cinderella in there too. Definitely a little bit of Beauty and the Beast. But part of the charm of this movie is it's like just a big stew of everything Disney before they kind of did that. And so it feels more affectionate and authentic than, as you said, a lot of their subsequent efforts to kind of tie it all together.
Right, so this opening act is essentially a condensed Disney feature. Not that long ago, we talked about a few entries in the Disney animated canon, and I mentioned that I did like a deep dive marathon where I watched all the ones I hadn't seen yet. And so it starts out with the storybook, and it's just well done, and it kind of presages the arc that the story as a whole is going to follow. It also had me thinking about like how the opening of the Batman animated series is like a little condensed depiction of how an episode will go.
Oh, interesting.
Like in 30 seconds, it's like, oh, a crook breaks out, and then Batman follows the crook, and then Batman catches the crook.
Right, but he's still dark and mysterious, and he's not the police. He leaves him for the police, but he has to brood and do his own thing. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so basically the premise of this opening segment, like you said, it's like a Disney story in micro, but it's basically a princess, a strawberry blonde princess, has all these animal friends, and she's hoping to someday meet her true love. Kind of like this was, I think it's Sleeping Beauty, where there's kind of this segment where she's in the woods and lonely as she becomes a teenager. And then the Prince Edward is what his name is. This is so in the animated version, they're kind of voiced by who they will end up being played by, and more or less resemble their real life counterparts. And the Prince, it's James Marsden is the actor. So do you know him from anything else, Brian?
He's in at least the first Sonic movie. I haven't kept up with those. I don't know if he sticks around.
I think he does. I forgot that he was in those recently.
I mean, those are making like a $shit-zillion, so it's a good gig if you can get it.
Well, he's got kind of like a square-jawed handsomeness to him, and also like a guilelessness to him. Like he just kind of comes across as like a not nobody, but like a everyman sort of, like a little dopey too, which is very much weaponized in this film. But I think makes it easy to cast him as the handsome guy. But also I think he appears in a lot of superhero stuff because he can just be like a handsome slab that's a cipher for the audience, you know?
Yeah, I think he's great in this movie.
Oh, he's so good in this. He's very, very funny. And meanwhile, so he's a prince, and Giselle, I guess she's not a princess at the start. I can't remember. Is she just a girl living in the woods, or is she a princess yet?
That's correct. She talks later with the stepdaughter about how she would become a princess by marriage. So, like Belle, like Tiana.
Gotcha. So, anyways, the prince comes and finds her, but it turns out that the prince's stepmother is an evil queen, voiced by Susan Sarandon, who is a terrific dramedy actress. She can be both drama and comedy. She's very funny, but she's also just a good actress. So she plays the stepmother, very, very much resembling the evil queen in Snow White in these animated portions.
So, yeah, I think this movie, you were right on the money when you said that it borrows the most from Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, with nods to the other princess movies too. But then we might, in this episode, talk about the recent Legacy sequel that they did. And when they return to the well, that one takes more from Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast.
Yep, for sure. I agree. And so there's also a friendly animal sidekick. It's a squirrel named Pip. So we have the prince, we have the princess to be, we have the animal sidekick. So Pip is voiced in the animated section by a voice actor named Jeff Bennett. Although, of course, when everybody gets to the real world, they become their real world versions. So what does a chipmunk become in the real world? A little squeaking guy. And the squeaking in the real world is actually not the same voice actor. It's actually the director, Kevin Lima, doing the squeaks, which I thought was pretty funny.
Really?
And then the last kind of piece of this is the lackey. He's a little bit like LeFou, is that his name? In Beauty and the Beast. He's kind of like roundish shaped, and he's voiced by Timothy Spall, who the large majority of people who know Timothy Spall by numbers probably know him as Wormtail. What's the guy's name?
Peter Pettigrew.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, so this was a throwback, thinking back to 2007 when they were still coming out with Harry Potter movies. You know, 2007 was also when Sweeney Todd came out and had like half the Harry Potter cast in it. So they were big names back then, even Timothy Spall. Creepy weirdo Timothy Spall.
Yeah, but here's the thing about Timothy Spall that you might not know if you've only seen him in those things, is that Timothy Spall is the best. He rules. Everything that he's in is way better if Timothy Spall is in it. It's like one of those people where like I'm Rick Dalton pointing at the screen and like jumping up and down excited whenever I see Timothy Spall appear in something.
Now, that's funny. You actually called him Rick Dalton. So we discussed a couple episodes back when we were talking Margaret Qualley. You said, oh, Margaret Qualley, she's in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Tarantino movie. So I assumed when you said that you had seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I went and watched it like last week. I thought it was pretty good. And then I came to talk to you about it, and you said you hadn't seen it.
No, I haven't seen it.
But then how do you know the name of Leonardo DiCaprio's character?
Oh, that's just what people call the meme, the Rick Dalton meme.
Okay.
So, I don't know. I only know it from the meme, to be honest.
All right, I knew it as the Leo pointing meme.
Well, that's also how I know it, yeah. One of my favorite memes of recent years. It's stuck around. It's very widely applicable. So a lot of people in that movie were real people, but Rick Dalton was not real, right?
That's correct. They're like, him and Brad Pitt are two like fictional insert characters that the history is going on around.
Gotcha. Okay. So they're both fictional. Gotcha. So anyways, this animated segment, we kind of have our key players from this animated segment, and the fantasy kingdom that they're in is called Andalasia. And I was trying to think if that was like a direct reference to anything. I don't know. That's just the fantasy kingdom. It's like generic fantasy world. It's exactly what you think of.
Sounds very similar to is it Andalusia when the Muslims ruled the Iberian Peninsula?
That even gets referenced in the film. Yeah. So then the stepmother is basically plotting this coup of sorts. This is where it's kind of most like Snow White. It's like, oh, we can't let the beautiful princess marry the prince. Oh, it's also a little bit Little Mermaid I was thinking of too for this portion, because they have to contrive a way to get her to not marry the prince. I can't remember exactly why, but they're determined that they have to kill her for whatever reason. I guess just to prevent her from marrying the prince. But the evil queen transforms herself into an old hag, just like Snow White, and pushes her into a well, into a place where there's no happily ever afters. But before that, just a couple more things on this animation bit. First of all, it's really good animation. So it's like I would watch a whole movie of this. If this were a whole movie, this would be like a very enjoyable film to watch. More attractive than most animated movies are these days. And just like an old throwback. Like, this makes me want Disney to just do like an unabashed throwback princess movie. You don't need any, like, just make it intentionally old fashioned.
Right, make it earnest. And once you said that it was directed by Tarzan director, I can kind of see that. This segment has like swinging through the trees. There's a lot of forest stuff. And there's motion and shadow, and like they really committed to the animation.
So the animation portion was actually supervised. I don't know if you would say directed. It's always fuzzy with me, like what the roles are in animation, but by this animator named James Baxter, who dates back to the early Disney Renaissance. He spent a lot of time there. DreamWorks poached him, and so he worked on a bunch of DreamWorks movies. And then he kind of started his own independent studio where he was contracting out to whatever company wanted to pay him. And so Disney hired him for this. And he had done like a lot of the character animation throughout. So I was wondering, I know a little bit about the animation technology. I'm guessing this was CAPS, which was the system used by most of the Disney Renaissance. There's like a couple of cool motion stuff that I think is CAPS, not what they call Deep Canvas. So Deep Canvas was what they were using towards the end of the Disney Renaissance, which is like the next version of CAPS, basically. And I've seen videos on it, and it's kind of mind-blowing. So basically what it is like they have these CGI environments that are like fully 3D rendered, and so they can do like free-flowing cameras, but then they illustrate in by hand, maybe not actually by cells, it's probably on a computer, but hand-drawn rather than computer-drawn, the characters and the objects in the background. And they do every single frame this way. There's probably ways they do it to speed it up a little bit, but like, because you're kind of like actually in a 3D space, 3D rendered space, but you're drawing every frame and every piece of that, it's like unparalleled sense of space and motion while still having like the core items be hand drawn, but like the environments are kind of 3D rendered, but they're inked and stuff by hand. Again, I think it's on the computer, but there's a fine line between done by a person intentionally rather than like rendered like a CGI thing is. So I'm not an expert on animation technology, but anyways, if you ever go watch Tarzan again, whenever he's like going through the vines and the treetops and stuff, like just try to admire what they're doing with a camera, like a quote unquote camera, that trying to get that to play with actual hand-drawn animation. Because cells, remember, like typical animation, we talked about this in our history of animation stuff during Animonth, but like the general idea of a cell is that it's like a transparent thing that you move just a little bit each frame, and maybe you redraw parts of it for each frame, but it's like on a flat background. So the fact that you're having actual quote unquote camera movement is like a real, it's challenging to do. It's not the default way that you do hand-drawn animation.
Yeah, we've talked about a variety of animated films, and you can really tell the difference in budget between different projects. Like we covered early on the Care Bears movie, and we mentioned that everything stays pretty flat. And you talked Roger Rabbit. If you watch like Making of Roger Rabbit, there's so many cool things that Industrial Light and Magic did with the compositing and like layers of light and layers of shadow, and Care Bears had none of that.
So anyways, it's a terrific bit of animation. Maybe not bleeding edge, but like very cool. And in fact, the fact that it just feels like a throwback almost is very charming. It's also like kind of a bit of a parody too. My favorite bit is the prince. I don't think the prince and Giselle have yet met, and she like falls from a tree, and he catches her and saves her, and he says, "Who are you?" She says, "Giselle," and he says, "Oh, Giselle, we'll be married in the morning." It's like they just met, and she's on board with it. It's just very funny. The line deliveries that James Marsden gives as the prince are so funny. Like this sort of like rip roaring, "Oh, Giselle!" It's so good.
Yeah, I love this little world, and I love that everybody is so committed to the rules of the fantasy realm. Like Giselle's song when she's talking about true love's kiss, and that's like the end all be all of existence.
Mm-hmm.
The line in the song that I find weird is, "That's the reason we need lips so much, because lips are the only things that touch." Like, I mean, I can kind of get that that's like intentionally like childish and childlike, but like you touch things with your hands. I don't know, it's just kind of a nonsense line.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like playing up the quote unquote chastity of the Disney films, when really it's like obviously undercurrents of like sexual coming of age in all of these films, you know?
Right. But it's a good melody. I like to play it on the organ. I have a book, a sheet music book with my harmonium, and that's a good one.
So you're talking about the True Love's First Kiss song?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's from that opening segment. So one thing we haven't said about this movie is it has an original score by Alan Menken and Steven Schwartz. Real Disney heavy hitters on this. This is not the B tier, the B team. This is the A squad.
That's right.
And there's a couple of memorable numbers throughout this. True Love's First Kiss is one of them. The next one is, well, we'll get to it actually. We'll kind of talk through it. All right, so where were we? So Giselle got pushed through this well to a place where there's no happily ever afters. And it's kind of a cool bit of like production. I don't even know exactly how they did it, but she falls into this space and then we see her, and now she's a human. So she's Amy Adams, but she's like wearing a real version of the dress, the wedding dress that she was wearing in the animated world when she fell through. And she like sees this light sparkling through, and then she pushes up and we realize it's like a grimy sewer grate in New York City. Where is there no happily ever afters? In New York City, of course. And now she finds herself in almost this like expressionistic version of New York City, where it's like glitzy neon lights and like mass chaos, and I don't know, it's very chaotic, and she's just overwhelmed by it. And you get right away why she was cast. She's so good, Amy Adams is, at like making her face like do a Disney princess thing, but like cartoon reacting, like, oh my goodness, like you really believe that she is a Disney princess come to life in this. One last thing on the opening bit before we move on to the rest of New York City is that you mentioned the opening book. So one thing is there's a little bit of narration at both the very beginning and the very end. And did you catch who was doing the narration, Brian?
Oh, geez. Who was it?
Julie Andrews, Mary Poppins.
Okay, I did. I gathered that at the end. So another thing I was thinking of was Shrek. I feel like this is definitely not as biting or like, yeah, bitter about the whole Disney thing as Shrek is. But both have Julie Andrews. And
that's a very good point. Wait, was Julie Andrews in the first Shrek?
Not the first one. She showed up starting in the second one.
But she, I think comparing this to Shrek is pretty spot on. So this came out after Shrek. Shrek was, I think, 2001, right? So this was like in production after Shrek. This is like, in some ways, the nice version of Shrek, where it's like a quote-unquote realist version of a Disney story, but like this one, you're right. It's not jaded. It's not anti-Disney. It's not a rant against Disney. Although I think Shrek is a little more complex than people give it credit for. It's got a sense of adventure.
It's got layers.
Yeah, like onions. It's got layers. Oh, and also one thing that I knew about this movie and I revisited this week is that it's got a lot of deleted scenes, almost 20 minutes of deleted scenes, Brian. So this is actually longer than the Disney animated movies typically are. It's like an hour and 49 minutes or so, maybe an hour and 50 minutes. And so what you're getting is more than an hour and a half, but an additional 20 minutes on top of that is like obviously too long for a story like this. I think it ends up being pretty much the right length for what it needs to be. But one of the deleted scenes is they recreated like the storybook that looks almost identical to one of the old Disney ones. Like I would guess it's the Cinderella one or something like that, like an exact replication of that. And it's very cool. So anyways, we are in New York City and Giselle is wandering around and she's like making all sorts of mistakes of stuff in the real world as something that would be in a fairy tale world. And that, like, this is the promise of the premise, basically. It's like she's a Disney princess who doesn't understand how the real world works. So she sees a small person who is walking around like trying to get somewhere and like bumps into him and he gives her a look and she's like, oh, Grumpy. Like he's Grumpy the dwarf. I almost feel like that joke wouldn't fly today.
So for whatever reason, I didn't grok this the first time I watched Enchanted, but it's probably because, like I said, this was only my second time watching Enchanted, whereas I watch Elf from 2003 pretty much every holiday season. And this movie has a lot in common with Elf, where you've got this fantasy world character who comes to New York City specifically, has to interact with real people, and there's many shared beats, one of which is encountering a little person and saying, oh, it's a dwarf, it's an elf.
Another one is she goes and talks to a homeless man and is like, oh, I could use a nice smile. And he gives her a big smile, but he's got like rotted, missing teeth. And then he grabs her crown and runs away. But interestingly, I just looked it up as you were saying that, Brian. This script was written in 1997, at least the first draft of it. Now, the rewrites of it happened after Elf, but at least the germ of the idea predates Elf. But I wouldn't be surprised if in that later bit they saw Elf and they directly or indirectly took some inspiration from it of like, oh, what are some things we can get right in the tone and the story and stuff here. So, yeah.
And it's a small pool, so there could be some Ants Bugs Life stuff going on.
Sure.
Inner studio synergy.
I do think like a character from a fantasy realm come to the real world is like enough of a basic hook that it's certainly plausible that they weren't trying to do an elf, quote unquote, when they did this, you know? Like, I would certainly buy that. And in fact, to me, a Disney princess in the real world is more intuitive than a Santa's elf in the real world as a story hook.
Yeah, maybe this was begging more to be made. But I even think like the family dynamic is similar where they've got, you know, a child already living in the home. And now you've got this basically adult child showing up and imposing on the family, living in the apartment. At the end, they have to find a way to make a living in the world. And they end up like writing a book about their experience. And
right.
Yeah.
So that does take us to the other human characters in New York, who are kind of the counterpoint to this. So we have Patrick Dempsey as kind of the lead New York City resident who's involved in all of this. So Patrick Dempsey...
He was McDreamy on Grey's Anatomy.
That's right, yeah. So I knew him from Grey's Anatomy. I mean, I had seen a little... I don't know if I'd actually seen it prior to... when I first saw Enchanted. I did end up watching a little bit of it with my college roommate who liked it. Watched a few episodes with him. But he was kind of Disney's, like, oh, we need a bigger name in the lead than Amy Adams, which looking back now is hilarious. Patrick Dempsey is the bigger name ahead of Amy Adams. I think he is, in comparison to basically everyone else in the cast, just fine. He's not great. He's not bad. He's just fine.
Well, he's also there to be the wet blanket.
Yeah, he's the straight man. But I think he's just fine as a straight man. He's not like a super special, but he doesn't bring the movie down, which is really all that he needs to do, you know? I'm trying to think. I spent like 2 minutes trying to think about who would be the ideal person to play the straight man. And I just couldn't come up with it. I feel like there's someone out there who like could have pivoted in the various tones that this character ends up having to go through much more deftly and expressively than Patrick Dempsey does. That's one of my what ifs, is what if they got like just the same way they got a truly great actor for Giselle, if they got a truly great actor for Patrick. What's his name? Actually, the character's name in the Patrick Dempsey role. Is
it Robert?
Yeah, Robert Phillip, which I think is a reference. According to Kevin Lima, they wanted to make every single name of something and even as many visual references as possible callbacks to past Disney films. So I'm guessing like Prince Philip is the joke there. It's like Robert Philip. Is Robert one of the princes too? I don't know.
I don't think so. Philip is in Sleeping Beauty, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think, yeah, Sleeping Beauty, is that Philip?
Pretty sure. I think both Snow White and Cinderella, it might be just Prince Charming.
Okay.
At least one of them, it's like officially Prince Charming.
So we have Robert here, and Robert is a divorce lawyer, which just inspired.
Really good. Genius.
So his job is every day he negotiates divorcing couples and tries to get them to come to compromises. Again, if you're going to like come up with who's the exact antidote, or the exact, I guess, contradiction of the ideals of a Disney princess, it would be a divorce lawyer in New York City, which I enjoyed this. So his deal is that he has a daughter. We don't initially learn why he is a single dad, but he's a single dad. He has a daughter who's around the age of 8. I don't know if we ever give her actual age. And he's extremely pragmatic and practical and clear-headed about making it in this world, especially in romance, and like not having this idealism and fairy tale sense to it. So again, not just in his occupation, but in his worldview, he's like the opposite of Giselle.
So what this had me thinking of was Miracle on 34th Street,
Okay.
which is another one that if you haven't watched, Dan, you got to watch that one. Now that we've finally checked off Strangelove, got to watch Miracle on 34th Street. But in that case, it's also, it's a woman who is a single mother and is living in New York City and teaching her daughter that don't believe in fairy tales. Like, romance is not real. You got to make it on your own.
Gotcha.
And don't believe some fantasy character who suddenly shows up and claims to be from another dimension.
Yeah. So, Robert is, and eventually we'll learn, I'll just say it now, that Robert used to be a little bit more of a romantic, and his wife left him and his daughter behind, and his daughter's name is, what is his daughter's name?
I think it's Morgan.
And he is dating a woman who's also very practical minded. And that woman is named Nancy Tremaine, by the way, which only gets revealed very subtly, I think, because Lady Tremaine, of course, is, if I'm not mistaken, that's the name of the stepmother in Cinderella, right? Lady Tremaine.
Right. That's correct.
So I'm sure you recognized who was playing Nancy, Brian.
Right. So this is Idina Menzel. Interesting and important for a couple reasons. So the music team on this film was Menken and Stephen Schwartz, Alan Menken, Stephen Schwartz. Alan Menken, of course, has done quite a few Disney movies. The scores pretty much all through the Disney Renaissance. And then when Howard Ashman died, the lyricist, Stephen Schwartz stepped in for a couple films, did, for instance, Hunchback of Notre Dame. Then he worked with DreamWorks. He did the music and lyrics for Prince of Egypt.
Schwartz or Menken?
Schwartz, Stephen
Okay.
Schwartz. And then he did a Broadway show called Wicked. Prominently
Crazy.
featured Idina Menzel.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sure everyone listening to this knows one of the biggest movies of the year and sure to be nominated for some Oscars. But yeah, Idina Menzel originated the Elphaba. Is that?
Elphaba.
Yeah, Elphaba.
And there's like a prominent Wicked poster in this movie, but it could have just been coincidence because they're in Times Square and there's a lot of Broadway posters, but
Right.
it felt intentional to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Also, she didn't have to wait very long to be a real deal, full-fledged Disney princess.
Mm-hmm. Right, of course. Very famously, Elsa from the Frozen franchise. So, kind of funny, and I don't think this is, we'll just go ahead and say it now. She doesn't sing in the first one. She appears in the second one and sings in the second one. Kind of funny to cast the most famous Broadway actress, the most accomplished Broadway actress of a generation, and not have her sing.
Well, Taylor Swift was in the Lorax and she never sings, so...
I thought about that too, Brian. But I want to talk about what the deleted scenes does for the ending of this movie, Brian. So we'll get back to that, because in the deleted scenes, she actually does sing. There's a song for her that they cut.
Okay. I actually did not know there were so many deleted scenes. I definitely am interested to watch those now.
Yeah. So we meet Robert, and he's on the verge of proposing to marry Nancy, which of course would make her the stepmother to Morgan. And they make that joke a couple of times.
Yeah, there's a lot of anti-stepmother propaganda. Because also the queen, the evil queen, also a stepmother.
Exactly, yeah. It might be too much. And then in the second movie, Disenchanted, is like a whole investigation of the stepmother trope.
Right,
So,
because
yeah.
Giselle, I mean, no matter what happens, any woman who enters this picture is going to be a stepmother.
Yeah. There's no way around being a stepmother.
The
right?
mother who stepped up.
Yeah, there you go. So Robert is riding in a taxi trying to tell Morgan that he's thinking about proposing to Nancy. And
They've
we get
been
this.
together for 5 years, by the way. They've been dating 5 years.
My experience with older couples has been that, especially like remarriages, is that they happen fast from my experience. So I think this would stand out. Like, I feel like if this was your 20s, dating for 5 years, not getting married, like, I feel like I know people who've done that, you know? But in your, I don't know, he's probably early 40s at this point, maybe upper 30s. I think that would stick out as unusual. And I think it adds some complexity. Like, I think it kind of works. It's like he's a little bit, you know, with his wounded heart, as we'll learn that he got left by his first wife when he was a bit more of a romantic. He's a bit hesitant.
Once bitten and twice shy, as they say in that song that we watched the movie based on.
That song that we watched the movie based on.
Last Christmas by
Christmas.
Wham. I just didn't sing it very well.
That's okay. I was like, wait, I know that line, but what's it from? And your singing did not help me too much, Brian. Sorry.
It's okay.
So anyways, yeah, they're driving down the road and he's like getting ready to say that he's going to propose to her. But who does Morgan see out the window but Giselle struggling in the New York street? Now, what she's done is she's climbed up on top of a billboard that is for a casino that's like fairy tale themed, very gauche billboard. And she's like knocking on the drawbridge portion as if it's a real castle. And Morgan runs out. And then, so of course, Robert has to run out to get Morgan to get back in the taxi. But then Giselle falls and lands on Robert, and he saves her, but they like kind of crumple to the ground, which is a callback from in the animated segment. There's a very graceful fall and catch where the prince catches Giselle falling in the animated one. So we're already kind of spoofing the fairy tale logic and like setting up parallels between Robert and the prince here.
Right. It doesn't work the same in this world. Many like complexities and wrinkles to what does work the same and what doesn't work the same between the two worlds.
Yeah,
and like how long it lasts if it does carry over. Like some of the stuff kind of wipes away over time.
Right. And I think I like that about it. It makes you want to know more about the world. But also I think it's good that you don't know too much about how it works, you know. It's like kind of like the Toy Stories. Like I feel like we get just enough in the Toy Stories about how the toy world works that it makes you curious about it, but you don't actually, you wouldn't be better served by learning more of the specifics, you know. But Robert sees Giselle and takes pity on her, brings her back to their, I guess, apartment or condo, and like is calling like, oh, there's this mentally deranged woman. And it is very funny. Like she comes across as like a mentally unstable person living in La La Land. But then he, like throughout the film, he kind of gradually, very slowly breaks towards Giselle's idealism of the world, which of course this is a romantic comedy, Brian. I don't think that's much of a surprise. And I think in some ways this really distills what a romantic comedy should be, which is two opposing worldviews that need to get merged together by the end. It's not just two people that need to get together. It's their diametric worldviews. And you're not going to get anything more diametric than this. And I like that they both kind of come towards each other a little bit throughout the film. Giselle needs to let go of her fairy tale delusions a little bit. And Robert needs to accept a little bit more romance and idealism and fairy tale magic into his own life. And so they both kind of gradually take steps towards each other throughout this. And so like one time is he's getting ready to call a taxi to come take her home. And then he like kind of sees her sleeping nicely on the couch and is like, okay, fine. She can stay one night on sleeping on the couch. And then, so then we cut to the next morning, Brian. And this is one of the funniest scenes in the movie is that Giselle is like, oh, I'm going to clean their house. Cause their house is like papers out and take out food stuff. And so, well, if you, as we saw in the opening, if you're a princess who needs to get done a household chore, what do? You call to your animal friends. And so she sings out the window, which is it's like a Snow White thing, getting all the forest friends to befriend you immediately. But what are the animals in New York, Brian? They're cockroaches and rats and bugs.
Yeah, a swarm of flies, just a cloud, and yeah, pigeons and rats.
So it's very funny. And so they're like, the cockroaches are like using their antenna to wipe grime off of it. At one point, they have the rats with the toothbrushes scrubbing the toilets. And I was like gagging at this, like, oh no. But this is like an example of like, what is the fairy tale magic that I think you were talking about here? Because she can control the animals, but they still stay their gross New York animals, but they kind of act like fairy tale animals.
Right. So she's like still got some of her powers.
Right. That's not just like a person who's crazy in the world. So she has some magic, some real magic that's carried over. So not just that, but when he wakes up and gets out, she's in the shower, and he's like, where'd Giselle go? Where'd the person that we rescued last night go? And then it's like, she's in the shower. He's like, oh no. And he like creaks open the door and is like, you need to leave. And then like, she's getting out of the shower. Very beautiful woman, of course, Amy Adams. And like, they have like birds hanging the towel in a strategic way. And she like stumbles and falls on top of him. Just a towel wrapped around her. A little steamy for this is definitely a PG movie, Brian, here.
Right. And then this is the moment that the, I guess not fiance, but long-term girlfriend.
Right. Nancy.
Idina Menzel walks in.
And sees that exact scene of her like falling on top of him, clothless, naked, I guess you would say, except for this towel. Very funny. Oh, and she's like, every morning she makes her own clothes, but she like cuts up his curtains and his blankets and stuff. Is very funny. But one thing that I like that I think this movie does a really good job of doing that, like in a lesser version of this film, they wouldn't really make space for, is a whole lot of conversations between Robert and Giselle about like reconciling their worldviews, each of them explaining how they feel about topics. Like romance is the main one, but like the world and like time and like caring for people. And I don't know, it's just I think it does a good job of like letting those characters actually have their worldviews bounce off each other. And I actually think they have really good chemistry. Like it really feels like they're drawing together and like sparking off of each other in different ways. One bit is like Robert explains, well, you just got me in trouble with Nancy, so now I'm angry with you. And she's like, anger? What is anger? I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it. And so he explains what anger is, which gets a great payoff later in the film.
And what I really like is that, so we've got kind of this love triangle going on now, but it becomes a quadrangle.
Right, because Nancy's there. And one thing that kind of happens is more and more people from the fairy tale world start going through the portal, jumping into the well. So again, we had Giselle, but now the Prince Edward, he is like, well, I got to go save Giselle. And so he jumps through and he comes out and he's James Marsden in like this goofy fantasy outfit.
What really makes it work for me is that every corner of this love quadrangle gets to stay likable. Like, I feel it would have been really easy to make James Marsden into like a Gaston type of guy where he feels wronged, he feels slighted. But he's just like a doofy himbo the whole time. And my favorite thing is just that he's so invested in his world's rules. Like we see that the shine is kind of wearing off for Giselle and she's kind of changing. But no, he's committed. He's into the role.
Yeah, it's very funny. He does stuff like he hops on top of a bus and like thinks it's a beast and slays it with his sword and stabs it through. And the bus driver gets out and starts yelling at him and he just takes everything at face value. It's very funny. And he ends up like connecting with, so we get the Timothy Spall character. He's kind of the next one who comes through not too long after the James Marsden character does. And they end up spending a lot of the film together.
It actually had me thinking of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because they stay at some like cheap motels together.
Oh yeah. And they call the TV the magic mirror, and like James Marsden is like talking to the magic mirror, but it's like soap operas and news reports and stuff coming out. It's pretty good. At one point, someone says, "Hey, welcome to New York," after something bad happens to Giselle, and she says, "Oh, thank you," which I thought was pretty funny. we also have Pip coming through at the same time, and he's just like a CGI chipmunk, but gets some real good little bits of physical squeaky comedy. There's one bit where he's trying to explain that Timothy Spall is working for the Queen, and the Queen is trying to kill Giselle, where he does like this acting bit that's very funny and adorable. Another nice thing about it, though, is like even the Timothy Spall character gets to have his own arc. So his arc is he's basically like a simp for the Queen, and he kind of realizes that he doesn't respect himself. He doesn't actually like himself, and that the Queen is just kind of using him. So he's kind of coming to this realization that maybe there should be more to his life than just doing whatever the Queen tells him to do. It's like his own like fairy tale mindset starts to fade away a little bit too, and he gets a little bit more clarity on what it is.
And he's always sneaking around, like assuming different costumes.
Right. Oh yeah, these are so and doing funny accents. It's really a terrific performance by him too, because he has to like do all this sort of like humiliating goon stuff, and all of it is pretty funny. Like do different accents and costumes and look kind of gross the whole time. So meanwhile, Robert is still trying to help Giselle figure out like, okay, you need to get out of my life because you're just causing trouble. But also like, I don't want to just abandon you because you're so kind and idealistic. And you clearly have all this belief in the good nature of people and romance and society. So he's kind of torn between like, just leave me because you're increasing the drama in my life. But also like, I can't just abandon you, you know, to increasing befuddlement to everyone around them. So one is he like brings her to the office for just a second to like try to get his secretary to do something for her to get her kind of out of the way. But did you see who the secretary was played by, Brian?
I think I did notice in the moment, but could you remind me?
Jodie Benson, the voice of Ariel.
So I did watch the credits at the end of this movie and scrutinized them, and you've got several of the legacy princesses. Paige O'Hara was in there somewhere.
Oh, she was.
Judy Kuhn, who was Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, no Lea Salonga. And wasn't she two of them?
She was the singing voice for Jasmine and Mulan, but she wasn't the speaking voices, but the singing voices for both.
All right. Well, she didn't pop up.
But no, you're right. She should have been there. She's a Disney
quite a
princess.
few of them, though.
I think also there's a musical number, a live action musical number near the midpoint of the film. That's one of the big signature scenes of the film that has some of the people in it are like familiar Disney faces. Like I think there's these old men who kind of dance and hold up flowers for old women. And I think a lot of them are the living, what are they, 9 grumpy men or something like that?
What I read was that they were the chimney sweeps from Mary Poppins who did the big dance number in that.
Oh, okay. I could have sworn, you're probably right about that.
It's quite possible that some of the old men show up as well, the animators, but I wouldn't expect necessarily the animators to be dancers, and these old guys are doing quite a bit of hot stepping.
That makes a lot more sense.
I did just watch, though, last night, I watched The Incredibles again, and I love The Incredibles. Someday we'll do an Incredibles episode, but that, at the end, has 2 of the 9 old men who are still around.
Oh, okay.
And they say, no school like the old school.
That's right. Maybe I'm getting my wires crossed on that and just thinking of that and knowing that they had some old Disney appearances in this. But yeah. So yeah, at one point, again, it's one of the scenes where we just kind of get Robert and Giselle talking. They're walking around the city and Robert's trying to kind of explain his relationship with Nancy to Giselle, talking about how pragmatic they are about their romance. And Giselle's like, oh, you need to do a big romantic gesture. And then she like breaks into song about that's how she'll know that you love her. And then like everybody in the Times Square is singing along with her and like choreographed to the song, and it gets more and more elaborate as it goes along. They're like recreating paintings and stuff, and it's a big production number.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of the movie. This is really, really well done, and there's just so many moving parts. I watched a little making of featurette on the DVD that was just about this sequence where it talked about the Mary Poppins guys and that like some of the older women had been in like the original West Side Story.
Oh, wow.
But just the way that it builds and builds and it ends up there's like 200 people in it and that they're all these different groups in Central Park because it's all shot in Central Park. And so this isn't just like an homage to the princess movies, but also to a lot of stuff that you know Disney for, like these big live action 60s musicals, Mary Poppins being the big one, but also I think this owes a lot to Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which is my favorite. And in the middle of it has a big like 10-minute musical number called Portobello Road, which is about this like cosmopolitan street, or maybe cosmopolitan is not the right word, but a street in London where many different like ethnic groups come together, like a melting pot. And there's like secondhand shops. And so in Portobello Road, it kind of grows into like this ballet epic where every different ethnic group in the city gets some little like feature. Some unique choreography, and it's like different corners of the British Empire. So it's like there's Indian Sikhs and there's Jamaicans with steel drums and stuff.
Oh, wow. That sounds really cool. I need to see that. I haven't seen it.
A lot of that same thing we get here in That's How You Know, where there's like a Caribbean music group and there's mariachi.
Yeah, I like when the mariachi guys appear. They add some cool horns in there.
And there's like a clogging group who are construction workers or something, and they like pull in Shakespeare in the Park, and there's just everything that you could think of. There's like stilt walkers and just a whole lot of stuff. And the making of featurette showed them practicing this choreography in like a airplane hangar, some huge indoor space where they could be and practice all the group movements and camera movements so that they'd be ready when they finally had to go, okay, we got one day in Central Park.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty impressive, yeah. I was thinking, I watched the clip of Another Day of Sun with my daughters recently, and we were talking about like how much logistics would have been needed to pull that off, like reserving a Los Angeles highway turnpike type thing.
That would be even more insane because that whole thing was one shot.
I know. Oh, that you're right. Yeah.
But I was definitely thinking of that as well.
So this whole kind of middle act, like when you kind of talk it out, it's not all that much happening. It's like just the same thing where Prince Edward is out looking for Giselle. Meanwhile, Nathaniel, the Timothy Spall character, is also looking for her because he's trying to kill her on the Queen's orders. And Robert is just taking care of like Giselle, trying to find a way to let her leave gracefully, but it just doesn't happen. And so they keep talking more and more. At one point they go out and they get dinner with the daughter. And while the daughter stepped away, Giselle is like repeating what a date is back to Robert. And it's like, oh, so this is a date. And he's like, oh, well, no, hold on. Not quite that. Because remember, he's still with Nancy at this point. But then a turning point happens. Like finally, Nathaniel finds Giselle, and there's like an incident at this pizza place, and so the news shows up there, and Prince Edward sees it on the TV, and he's like, "Magic mirror, tell me where this Giselle is." And it's a news reporter talking about it. He says, "And I'm so-and-so from 116th and Broadway." And then he says the line, 116th and Broadway, in like this his James Marsden enunciation, and it's so good.
I thought it was really strange that the news story that gets featured is like rodent incinerated at pizza place.
Yeah,
because they thought the chipmunk went into the oven, and it didn't actually. But I like that this made headline news.
Yeah, I don't think that would make the A story on the evening news, you know.
But I guess sometimes I see that like a rat was found in the KFC fryer, but usually it doesn't. You know, they're not like talking heads about it on CNN.
Right. But eventually, so this gives Prince Edward the information he needs to go find Giselle. So he finds the right apartment, and he busts in, and he immediately thinks that Robert has kidnapped Giselle. And so he like draws his sword and is like, "I will slay you, knave." And Giselle's like, no, they're friends. And like on a dime, he's like, oh, okay. And stops. And I like how he takes things at face value. I use the word guileless. And there's a lot of that to both the performances of Amy Adams and of James Marsden in this.
Right. They really read as that they came from the same universe.
Exactly, the same, yeah. And that they're actually people from that fantasy world, right? And so now he takes her, although we see they start singing the True Love's First Kiss duet. And right when Giselle is supposed to come in, she doesn't sing her line because we gather it's kind of a couple things. So one is, like you said, some of the fairy tale magic is fading away because she's learning more about the quote unquote real world. But also now she's had kind of this ongoing thing with Robert. And there's this one scene from a little bit earlier where she gets to be angry for the first time. And she's like, I feel so angry, because he's explaining to her that it's unlikely the prince is ever going to come find her and she just needs to accept that. And then they like draw together. So he's just showered and he's just wearing a robe and she's like putting her hand on his bare chest, and it's like a real sparks moment of chemistry between them. So like we see definitely this romantic comedy element, the romance there. They're being drawn together, and we gather that Giselle has probably started to feel feelings for McDreamy herself. But now the prince is back, and just a lot of like stuff of like the worlds clashing here. Very well done, in my opinion. So one is, remember Giselle had briefly been at the divorce lawyer office, and like the client that Robert had been working on is this black couple. By the way, the man...
He was the guy from The Wired, right?
Exactly, yeah. Didn't we talk about him from something else recently?
Yeah, something we watched that he showed up in.
I was trying to remember, yeah. But because Giselle spoke to them of like not believing that they would no longer be in love, like calling out the admirable qualities in both of them, they have now fallen back in love. One deleted scene is Robert gets demoted because the law firm lost money because the divorce didn't go through.
I found this whole little arc pretty funny. I don't know that it necessarily needed more time, but it did have me wondering. It's like, well, these lawyers have vested interests in these two people actually going through with getting divorced, because that's like how they'll get their money.
Meanwhile, Robert has taught Giselle that like a real romance, you don't just marry each other the next day because your heart tells you that you feel that at the moment. You need to get to know each other, talk about your interests, go on dates. And so Giselle's like, oh, before we go back to Andalasia, we need to go on a date ourselves. And so they go wandering around the city. And I like that we see them like eating a corn dog, and he's got like a cheesy tourist hat on and stuff. But they decide that they're going to go to a ball. And meanwhile, Robert has agreed to take Nancy to a ball. That was kind of like the culmination of that's how you know you need to do a romantic gesture type thing.
That's right. So during that long number, Giselle had found like a little kiosk advertising that this ball was going to happen. And she says, oh, well, Nancy would love that. And Robert's like, no, Nancy doesn't really like stuff like that. You know, she's very down to earth. But then, like, as soon as he tells her about it, she is in love with the idea.
Right.
She's like, absolutely, this is fantastic. So we start to learn that Nancy actually is into the romantic thing, and McDreamy just thought she wasn't.
Right. He kind of projected his own vision of pragmatic romance upon her. I do think the movie should have had a little bit more of this. I feel like Nancy gets done a little bit dirty, or like maybe not dirty, but like you don't quite get enough of a sense of her character. There's one or two deleted scenes with more from her. One like with her talking with a coworker after she found Giselle at the apartment the first time, where she's talking about like, well, I don't know about that guy. You know, it's like we get the sense that maybe she's not super invested in the romance. I feel a little bit more of that, where she's not really feeling the spark. Might have made the dynamic work just a little bit more. But I don't think it's that bad. But I could have used a little bit more of it to like really make me not feel bad for her. Feel like this is what destiny needed, was for Giselle and Robert to draw together. But it does culminate at the ball. So now Of course, Nathaniel has failed in killing Giselle over and over again. He's come close to it, but hasn't gotten quite there. But he's also, like we said, gone on his own arc of like, hold on, should I actually just be following this witch's orders to go and kill this nice person for no real reason? And it's around then that Susan Sarandon, the evil queen, enters New York. And I like her entrance. She kind of like dramatically rises up out of the sewer grate. And she strikes a great villainous pose in like the evil queen garb. I feel like there's always a risk that it's just going to like feel like silly cosplay. But the movie production is just, it's good enough and impressive enough that it never just feels like actors wearing costumes. It feels like they got sucked out of a fantasy world. I'm always convinced by it and impressed by it.
I agree.
So they arrive at this ball and like Robert and Nancy are already there. And then Giselle and Prince Edward get there. By the way, Giselle had to go out shopping to get clothes with Morgan. And by the way, one of the dynamics here is that Morgan really likes Giselle, but we gather she really does not like Nancy. Or at least like doesn't feel a connection to Nancy. Maybe it's not dislike. But it does it in a way like that doesn't make... We never get examples of Nancy being mean or anything like that, you know? She's not bad. It's just like she's not what... Morgan dreams of and having a new mom type thing, you know?
Right.
So just the fact that she's been around for, if it's 5 years, that means she's been around for like as long as Morgan can remember without actually being her mom. So I can see why there'd be some resentment there. They go on a shopping spree. There's a classic gag with the credit card. Dad says this is only for emergencies. I think this is an emergency, getting dressed up fancy for a ball. But at the ball, I think it's funny that like the instant that Giselle and Edward arrive, they go say hi to Nancy and Robert. First of all, Idina Menzel, the Nancy, is like, what's she doing here? And I'm kind of the same way. If I'm her at this point, she's been kind of forgiving, but Giselle really has been hanging around a little longer than she needed to.
It had me thinking about May December that we watched, where it's like, why is Natalie Portman still here?
Exactly, yeah. But like the instant they get there, the announcer's like, all right, and now we're going to do the couple swap song. Everybody dance with somebody else at the ball.
Okay, and when they do that at dances, it's never a slow dance song.
I know.
This is a slow dance.
It's not just a slow dance, but it's like a romantic longing song. You're in my arms. It's like, this is not what I would pick for the couple swap song.
Yeah, it's not usually how that goes.
But of course, it does give us a nice chemistry moment. Really great chemistry between Amy Adams and Patrick Dempsey here.
Also kind of interesting costume design that this is the like enchanted fairy tale dance that they're at. This very leaning into the like Renaissance fair culture almost, where the whole idea is people go and they've got the poofy sleeves and stuff. But then Amy Adams now has this like very modern prom dress.
Terrific point.
Like sleeveless, skin tight, sparkly. So like a pretty dress, but not the like over the top princess dress.
Excellent point. Yeah, so we've kind of flipped here. So now this is kind of more about their worldviews kind of clashing and swirling around. Everyone else is in the fantasy get-up.
Including there's like a lot of like Mozart guys. Like powdered wigs and footman type like knee breeches.
And that also made it funny for me that it's like, it's this sort of throwback ball and they're doing like jaunty, you know, like Mozart era music. Like I call that classical era. What is that? The 1700s? I don't know. And then all of a sudden it's like a passionate ballad with a vocalist singing like a pop rock style.
That's a good point. It's suddenly R&B. R&B for Rococo and Baroque.
Yeah, something like that. But now Susan Sarandon's appearing. Finally the time she's gonna pull the trigger, finally finish off Giselle. And so part of the way that this Nathaniel character, the Timothy Spall character, has been trying to kill Giselle has been with poison apples, which of course, classic Disney image, the poison apple. And it just keeps going wrong. The apple flies the other way due to some sort of mischief. But now Susan Sarandon has the last one. as the evil queen. And Giselle kind of realizes that Robert is going to be with Nancy, that she can't have him. And so she's feeling really depressed. And so we see Susan Sarandon appear as the old hag in real life for a bit and offer an apple, which she just takes and eats. Is there justification given? I can't remember for why she's got to eat the apple.
I don't remember. I mean, it could be the same pitch as in Snow White, is like it'll make your wishes come true.
Yeah. But of course, just like Snow White, she collapses into a slumber. But you know what cures the slumber is true love's kiss, Brian. So, of course, it's Prince Edward goes in and kisses her right away. And then it gets like the dramatic music and then nothing happens. Like, oh my gosh, is Prince Edward not really the true love's kiss? Whoever could it be, Brian? I don't know. And then just before midnight, when the spell is going to wear off and she's going to die forever, Robert leans in and gives her a kiss. By the way, Nancy's like, oh, come on, it's got to be you who goes in and does the kiss, which I thought you're right. They do a good job of making people aware and likable of their tropes.
Yeah, and everybody's cool about it because the prince is the same way. He's like, it is you!
And it does wake her up. By the way, as this is going on, like part of the reason that the queen hasn't actually killed Giselle right away is that Nathaniel gets a backbone. For me, this is like a great moment. Like he has his arc of his redemption. He stands up to the queen and pushes back against her, like takes her evil sword and like holds it up against her so she can't kill Giselle. Way to go, Nathaniel. But now everybody's awake and we need to have our action CGI climax. So Susan Sarandon turns into a dragon, an evil dragon, and captures Robert. So now all of a sudden we're doing like not just like a world flip, but like a gender flip, which to me is like kind of a different thing. It's like similar, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, I'm glad that they didn't like have too much of the movie be that. It works okay here at the climax because it's it's the culmination of various ideas that have been building. Like it's not too out of left field, but I was glad that the whole movie wasn't that.
Completely agree. I think this is the weakest part of the film. I don't know what they could have done to make it better. I don't know. But it doesn't really click for me. The dragon talks too much and is like the CGI is just kind of okay. It's not that bad. Honestly, like streaming movies these days have worse CGI in my opinion. But I don't know what you could have done to save it. But you're right, it is kind of the culmination because it's in the real world, but it's still a fairy tale situation. And Giselle needs to go and be the hero and be the clever one to figure out how to save the day, even though she starts it as the princess who just falls into the man's arms. So it kind of completes her arc too. Although it's still like a fairy tale thing, so I don't know. But she does end up outsmarting the dragon and like barely saving Robert, and the queen falls and splatters into magic dust. But there is an interesting shot where it like zooms out on the building that they're in, and it very much resembles the Cinderella castle from the Disney logo. Did you notice that one, Brian?
Yeah, it's a castle-y building, and they climb all over it. Like, this whole sequence must have been really expensive.
Yeah. And it's raining outside during all this, so we get Amy Adams in her prom dress all, like, covered in rain. It had me thinking of Spider-Man.
Yeah. Or, like, Jurassic Park, where it's the dinosaurs in the rain. Also, though, this building specifically had me thinking about, did you ever see the Disney movie from like 2010 that was the live-action Sorcerer's Apprentice with Nicolas Cage?
And Jay Baruchel. I haven't seen it, but I'm familiar with it.
It was not good.
Really?
But it was like a lot of the team from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies put together this Sorcerer's Apprentice movie where he's like in New York and he's got his like sorcerer's lair up on a skyscraper.
Oh, interesting. I would watch it sometime. I like Jay Baruchel.
The production design is similar to this sequence with the dragon and the skyscrapers.
All right, so the evil queen is dead, but we need our new status quo, our denouement. As I try to get that into every episode.
Well done, Dan. Well done. That's perfect. That's how I would say it. I don't know if that's quite how Gavin would say it, but we're moving on. No more denouement.
So a couple things. So one is, all right, if we're going to have Giselle and Robert get together, that leaves two people in a lurch. That leaves James Marsden's Prince Edward in a lurch. And also Nancy, Idina Menzel. So, hey, let's just let them get together. Why not? I kind of like it. I wish I liked it more. I think there's just a little bit missing from it. And I think you actually get some of it in the deleted scenes. So here's where I'll reveal the biggest swing in the deleted scenes that we don't see in the film. We get a little bit of it, but we don't get the whole thing. So what in the deleted scenes, what happens is, I almost want to see this like edited into an alternate ending, is it cuts from that, like the dragon having fallen down, flash forward, just like no intermediate stuff, flash forward to Giselle and Robert at Robert's home saying goodnight to Morgan. And it's clear they're telling the story of what just happened, how they met and how they fell in love. Okay, that's kind of cool. And then they're like reciting it like they've said it a bunch of times. And Morgan says, everyone went home except for one person. And then it does like a extended version of what we get of Prince Edward and Nancy falling in love, where it frames the whole ending as a happily ever after between them, as if like the big happy ending wasn't for the main couple we've been following all along, but that this has just been a buildup for a happy ending between Prince Edward and Nancy. And I kind of wish they had stuck with this and like leaned into this bit a little bit more.
Well, I haven't seen the deleted scenes yet. The way that it does end, I remember the first time I watched it, I was like surprised and charmed, and I do still like it. I'm glad that there's somebody for everybody and that nobody ends up unlikable. I think you're right that Nancy is the most like left in the lurch. But I mean, there was a little bit of the setup that she likes the fairy tale stuff, and now there's this kind of opening for her to step into. What I thought was really silly, though, is that they have the Cinderella shoe. So Giselle loses a shoe, and Edward's like, well, who will wear the shoe now? And it just perfectly fits Idina Menzel also, meaning they have the same size feet, I guess. But it was like, that was very strange.
You're right. That gag could have been developed a little bit more. I think it's almost there. I think it could have just been, to get to really great, it could have just been developed, cooked a little bit more. They could have polished it just a little bit more, and I feel like it would be very satisfying instead of just mostly satisfying. And I do think it is a good ending. It is very charming and happy when they're together. And then we see them being a happy couple now, them in this case being Giselle and Robert. And there's this one bit of them dancing around the apartment where like Patrick Dempsey does this really goofy dance. He's like a very goofy dancer in this bit. If you ever go watch it again, Brian, keep your eyes on Patrick Dempsey. He does like a little monkey dance, and it's very awkward and funny. And at one time I was like, I wonder if anybody else thinks this is funny as I do. And I searched Patrick Dempsey dance, and it was the first result was a YouTube clip of it. I don't know if it's still up. It's like in The Social Network, when
Severin dances across the room, right?
Yep, to Jesse Eisenberg.
You've mentioned that before. I've probably mentioned this before, but I think Dan kind of looks like Andrew Garfield. So to me, I can picture Dan doing that dance. He's got like a sombrero on his head too, or some weird hat.
Yeah,
because it's like Jewish Mexican night.
I'll drop that in the Discord, that clip. thegoodsfilmpodcast.com. You can join the Discord, friends.
One last thing about Idina Menzel and Marsden ending up together. I've been sending Dan and his brother Lord of the Rings memes lately, but one of the things that happens at the end of Lord of the Rings is that there are two kind of like cast-off characters who got left in the lurch, and they end up together. One of them is Faramir, who was Boromir's brother, who was always getting shit on by his dad. The dad liked Boromir, and then Boromir died, and he doesn't like Faramir. And then the woman is this woman who is chasing after Aragorn the whole trilogy. She's really, really into Aragorn, and he's not exactly stringing her along, but he's holding out for Tyler, obviously, Liv Tyler. He's got this elf girlfriend who he's like writing letters to, and this blonde chick is like, well, she's going to the Undying Lands and I'm here, and he's like, I'm gonna go fight a battle. But then in the end, Arwen comes back, and so there's nobody for her, and she like looks across the room and there's Faramir. and then they're together.
I'm sure those are all real characters and he didn't just make that up, but I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about right now. Has that been in some of the memes you've sent?
Faramir was. I don't think any of the other stuff was, but it's a similar dynamic where they're like characters that nobody loves and they can love each other.
All I know is from the memes, tomatoes are a big deal in Lord of the Rings memes. Doesn't like the weird old king eat a tomato weird or something like that? Is that what it is?
That's what happens.
Okay.
You got it. You know this stuff. You're a regular Gondor head.
Couple of the other scenarios at the ending, new status quo. We see Nathaniel sticks around New York City and he writes, like you said, a self-help book called My Royal Pain, which I appreciated. And then meanwhile, Pip writes one in the animated world called Silence Isn't Golden. This is the one where I noticed when you see it like flashes through the people in line to get the book. And like they're all characters from Disney movies. There's like a Pumbaa in there and stuff.
Oh man, I wasn't paying attention. Maybe the first time I watched it, I saw some of that. I didn't catch that this time.
And then Amy Adams, Giselle, opens a fashion store, like a princess fashion store that girls go to when they want to get their princess dresses and stuff.
And she's still got the like unpaid labor from the animals working in her sweatshop.
And then, yeah, we have Julie Andrews narrating the end. One more thing about the alternate ending, the deleted scenes from the ending is there's a whole number where Nancy and Prince Edward fall in love, and that's where you get Idina Menzel singing. So I think it's worth checking those out. I really like the way that it is, but I feel like there was the possibility for just bringing it to the next level if they had touched it up a little bit. I get the sense that they might have done some like last minute edits to try and make the ending a little more conventional or something like that. But
yeah, I definitely want to see those. I need to find where I put the DVD.
It's also, they're assembled on YouTube somewhere too. Although the one I remember when I saw it, it had an introduction, I think from the director, but somebody was like introducing the scenes. But the clip that I saw was just they pulled out the scenes into like a single 20-minute clip. Or maybe it's like 17-minute clippers. And they had a little bit more animation storyboard stuff, not fully animated, but you can see like other animated segments they were planning. And that's Enchanted, Brian. So kind of went on a little longer than I expected. Let's just do the speed round on the sequel. So they did a legacy sequel released in 2022 called Disenchanted. It was initially going to be a theatrical release, but post-COVID, when Disney was like, oh, our whole thing now is we're debuting key movies on Disney Plus so that everybody will have to sign up for Disney Plus. So they did some of the Pixar's and some of the Disney movies there. And this was one of their like signature streaming releases. So this was only to Disney Plus, but you watch it. I think it's got a little more budget and polish than your typical streaming release, although it's not as good as a real theatrical release, I would say. What was I guess the premise is it's many years in the future. Giselle and Robert are still married, but like Giselle is missing the fairy tale world. And so she's become disenchanted, you might say. And so they move out to like the suburbs away from the city. And Morgan has become like a sullen teenager. And Giselle finds even in this new world, it's not all that she thought it would be. By the way, they also have a baby. And there's like this whole convoluted thing where Idina Menzel and James Marsden come and give like a magic wishing wand to the baby. And then Amy Adams and Giselle wishes, I wish my life was a fairy tale again. But it turns out that a fairy tale isn't always good because the stepmother becomes evil and battles with her sullen teenage daughter. So it's got a lot going on in it. It's like 2 hours or maybe over 2 hours. But what were some of your impressions in this, Brian?
So I came into this one really expecting not to like it because I had seen some pretty middling to negative reviews. But I ended up overall positive on it. It makes sense to me now that you say it was originally going to be theatrical because I was thinking this looks pretty good for a straight to streaming thing. Of course, this was during this nebulous like 18 months to 2 years where they were just putting everything straight to streaming. And I mean, I can see the arguments either way because it's like we have to feed the subscription beast. It's like we got to always have new stuff so that people subscribe. But then you got nothing for the theaters, so it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I think Disney is still trying to figure out what they're doing. But I thought it borrowed elements from some Disney films we hadn't seen as much from yet. There's a lot of Beauty and the Beast where there's like the singing appliances. And what I really thought was interesting was everybody is older, which is bound to happen with legacy sequels. Often legacy sequels, I think, why did they even make this? It's like everybody is kind of past their prime now. But that at least plays into the story where we've got Amy Adams as now in the stepmother role. She's not the princess anymore. She's aged out and kind of grappling with that and what are the ramifications of that. So I found it interesting. There's also a little bit of Tangled. Tangled came out in between the two movies, so the house that they live in looks very like Rapunzel's tower.
Yeah, and when they turn it into the fairy tale world. So I guess the idea is, it's actually, now that I think about it, it's a lot like Teen Beach and Teen Beach 2, where one of them is some characters going to the one world and the other one is other characters going to the other world. So you kind of have like, okay, now the characters who were in the real world, like the Patrick Dempsey character, or what would they be like if they were stuck in a fantasy world? Because with her wish, Giselle creates like a fantasy world. There's also a villain played by, what's the name of that actress?
Maya Rudolph from SNL.
Right.
Kamala. I watched this with my mom, and she's like, sometimes I can't tell. I see a picture of Kamala Harris, and I think, that doesn't look right. Because she was thinking about Maya Rudolph.
Yeah, I remember it being like a little confused and overwritten as a story, just kind of messy. And I also think one of the things I love about Enchanted is that like the balance that it lands on between idealism and being in the real world is like very perfect for me, and the way that it builds to that. And so like messing with that balance is just going to feel off. Like it's a romantic ending without like completely ditching the themes of the complexities of being in the real world. Again, sort of like Teen Beach now that I think about it. Maybe it's not a surprise that I like both of those movies. And so there's bound to be something kind of cynical revisiting it. If you're gonna like have any real conflict. And I will say, like, it could have been way worse. You're right. It could have been like thoroughly half-hearted, and they brought in the whole original cast. They got Alan Menken back and Steven Schwartz back. I know it's Menken is back. Is Schwartz back too?
It did say they were both back, which I wouldn't have guessed. Like, I got all the way to the credits. I thought they got some B-listers because the songs are not as good. Especially, there's a song Idina Menzel gets to sing this time, which is good. But the song she sings is called "Love Power," and she just keeps saying "Love Power." Which, similar to when we talked last Christmas, I said too much emphasis on the word special. Here, love power is a silly thing. It's too thin a reed to put that much weight on. Also, there's a song in The Producers called Love Power that's sung by a hippie. And so I was just thinking of that the whole time.
Love Power. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I remember my favorite song from it is like, so part of the thing is when she makes her fairy tale world, she inadvertently turns herself into the evil stepmother, and so we get some like Gollum stuff where like she's trying to decide, is she evil or is she good, and it's like she can't quite control it. And I really enjoyed that bit. Or maybe it's more like Green Goblin or something like that. And because Amy Adams is just a phenomenal actress, and she's able to pull off all these different things and like unite it and make all of it like, oh yeah, of course she's awesome when she's vamping around and it's a villain. Oh yeah, she's awesome as Giselle. Oh yeah, she's awesome as like a doubting mom. And like just all these things, like, oh, a woman who's like struggling with entering middle age and becoming disenchanted with the world, who was once a fairy tale princess. Like, she makes you believe she could be all those things, which is terrific and not something to take for granted. Which again, I don't hate the movie. I don't think it's anywhere as good as Enchanted, but there's a one where like she's in evil mode and she does like a duet sing off with the Maya Rudolph. I remember when I watched it, I was like, I feel like you could have just cut the Maya Rudolph character and the story more or less works, because it's really less, she ends up being the villain, but like you kind of didn't even really need a villain because Amy Adams ends up being kind of the villain of it. But I do like their duet number.
I agree that it would have been simpler and probably better overall if they had cut the Maya Rudolph character. A couple random thoughts. Alan Tudyk shows up. He's the must-have for Disney movies like the past 10 years, that he voices like a magic scroll. I liked the scene when Amy Adams first casts the spell that turns her whole neighborhood into the fairy tale village, and it's almost like a bell number. It's like all the people singing together, the whole village. Another moment where it's like, okay, this was a big production. I wish we had gotten to see more of Marsden. He pops in a couple times, but he's not there very much.
Right, he doesn't get to do the same charming shtick that he does in Enchanted of being like a himbo. I like that term that you used in the clueless in the real world. I noticed, like, often with these not quite A-list family comedy films, you get a lot of TV actors, and I noticed that for this one too. Like, I think Yvette Nicole Brown is in there from Community, and then there's like one or two people from The Office in there too, I think.
Oh yeah, Oscar is there.
Yeah.
One other thing about legacy sequels kind of in general is that, and in this case especially, you got to undercut your happy ending. And that's like part of the story here. But I think often it kind of devalues not only the new film, but the original film as well. Because it's like, well, we didn't really end things the way that we thought we did. Things weren't that satisfying. So I think you got to be careful when you make a legacy film.
I completely agree. That's kind of what I meant, is like, you have such a nice ending on Enchanted that even though I kind of spent some time talking about ways I thought they could have made it a little bit better or they could have developed it a little bit more, it really is a sweet and satisfying ending. But you undercut that. You, like you said, we can only have more conflict if it's not a happily ever after, you know?
Right.
So I kind of agree with you there.
One instance that sticks out to me, and I mentioned it earlier in the episode, so I'm circling it back to it now, is Wreck-It Ralph 2, where, I really, really like the ending of Wreck-It Ralph. I mean, I guess it's not great cinema necessarily, but it did make my favorites list. But the kind of the hook, I guess, of Wreck-It Ralph 2 is that, like, Ralph was happy with his ending and wants it to stay that way, but Vanellope wants to grow, wants to have more, wants to have a different life. And it's like, well, that's, kind of pulling at the strings of cohesiveness.
Right. And Indiana Jones 5, it really stuck out to me. We have like this just really downtrodden version of Indy in the start of Indy 5. I remember that. I think he ends up with a happy ending because it's Indiana Jones, you always do. But I just remember, like, when that started, it was like, dang, things are not looking great for Indiana Jones at the start of this film.
Yeah, because they killed off Shia LaBeouf. So it's like, what is his legacy? Because his son is dead now.
And then also, he's like on bad terms with the various women he's been with. One thing I didn't think that the series needed to do was make, what's the name of the Raiders' love interest?
Marion.
Make Marion the
end all be all.
Exactly. Like a great love type story. I never felt like it was a great love in Raiders, But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, and it's maybe better than your average legacy sequel, but it's definitely not essential. It doesn't deepen the original. I will say the one thing I really liked is the examination of the relationship between Giselle and Morgan, who's the teen in that. And like, the stepmom becomes the mom. In fact, like, the crux of it is that, whatever in the climax works only because Amy Adams is her real mom, she's the mom who stepped up, like you said, Brian. But I think I'm ready to rate. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with either Enchanted or Disenchanted, Brian?
No, I'll give my other thoughts as we rate, I think.
So Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So Brian will do Enchanted, then Disenchanted. Is Enchanted from 2007 good?
I really, really like this one. I'm right on the fence, actually, of the masterpiece rating. often when I give 8s, it's because the film is like the ideal example of the thing it's trying to be, like the platonic form. And this comes really, really close to that as far as being a loving parody of the Disney princess films. It knocks it out of the park, and it's earnest. It still manages to be sincere in a way that things like Shrek are more satirical. And I like it. It's a strong cast. I really liked Marsden this time. But pretty much everybody. I like that even though there's conflict, nobody's nasty. The animation is great. I think I'm going to land at the very, very highest 7. And I feel like I need a reason as to why a 7 versus an 8. And I don't quite know. Maybe you can elucidate a little bit more, Dan. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, but I think that's where I'm at, is exceptionally good, but right knocking at the door of the masterpiece.
So when I made my first ever top 100 list in 2009, I had Enchanted on that list. I don't remember exactly where, but it might have been in above number 50. When I made my list for our 100th episode, I did not include Enchanted. And if we were to make another top 100 now, I would definitely go back to having it on my list. I'm kind of in a similar boat to you where, like, as I was watching this for like the first 2/3, I was like, I'm just going to make the leap. I'm going to give this a tour to go. I'm going to give this a masterpiece rating. So few films in this world make me as happy as Enchanted does, because you're right. It skewers fairy tales, but it loves Disney movies. You can only make something like this if you truly love it, and not just for crass mercenary reasons, although there is some of that, like, oh, we're going to revitalize people thinking about the princesses and stuff. I think there was some of that in the design of this, but like, it just really feels like it loves not just those movies, but the feeling of romance, the feeling of adventure, the feeling of following your heart that it evokes. And it's a very, very funny movie. Marsden is so funny. Amy Adams' performance just blows me away. It's just the fact that she feels like a Disney princess come to life, and then she has like this whole arc that she very believably goes through. It's one of my favorite movie performances, which is a silly thing to say for a movie like this, but it really is. And I think that the script is actually really good. I was like, I don't expect the scripts in movies like this to be good, but the dialogue and like the way that it kind of explores the various worldviews is really sharp. And there's just some good jokes, and the cast is pretty outstanding. I'll reiterate that I think a better version of this movie has a better actor for the Patrick Dempsey role. I think I'm going to think about who it could have been, but he's not like a worst actor candidate or anything.
It's a little complicated because this was like 15 years ago. So it's like you got to think back a little ways of who was the pool then.
In 2007, right. I do think that it has a little bit too much potty humor, like dogs peeing on the legs or like slipping in ogre boogers type stuff. That's okay. It's par for the course. That's part of Disney movies too, is you have the comic relief, you know? So I was like, I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to give this the masterpiece rating. I'm going to do it. And then I just always get a little deflated at the dragon CGI. It's fine. It's not bad, but it's like not the foot you want to go out on, because it's just not clever the way that the rest of the movie is. It doesn't feel like a terrific setup and payoff like so much of the movie does. It doesn't rely on the chemistry and comedic timing of the actors the way that so much of the movie does. It doesn't even, like, it's animated, but it's not using the really cool animation that opened it and ended it. It's just like cheap CGI that you'd see in a run-of-the-mill 2007 film. So I'm with you. I'm going to give this a high-end 7, verging into masterpiece territory, because it really is. It's such a joyful film. It makes me so happy. As happy as just about any film this side of Teen Beach Movie, Brian.
I was thinking of the Teen Beach movies as well. In that we've got the people popping between worlds and commenting on genres. It's Disney, of course. Throughout our podcast, we're coming up pretty soon on episode 200, but we've talked about the idea of what is a Dan Core movie, what is a Brian Core movie. And some films fall into the sweet spot of just we both really like this kind of thing, and maybe that just indicates it's like a 4-quadrant success, because who doesn't like Toy Story, for instance?
Right.
But I felt watching this that it's like, this is the kind of thing that both of us are going to give a high rating to. Like, we like this, and now that you said that it was from the director of a Goofy movie, it's like, that tracks.
Last thing I'll say in its favor, even though the point of it is to skewer Disney movies and like being a rom-com is almost secondary, I really felt the chemistry and like the romance of it. I really get swept away in it. And maybe that's like, I guess, in conversation with the Disney stuff is why it works so well. But like when like Patrick Dempsey quietly starts singing to himself the love song as they're doing the dance at the ball, I'm like, oh man, this is like really sweet and really romantic. I really like this. So great film. Watch it if you don't. By the way, remember I said I put this on my top 100 in 2009? When I shared it with one of my friends and he hassled me in my top 100. It's like, overall, not the most impressive top 100. There's a lot of forgettable ones on here, like Enchanted. And I'm still mad that he called out Enchanted as a movie not worthy of being on my top 100. So, first of all, I would never say that to someone sharing what their top 100 movies are. That one in particular made me annoyed.
Yeah, my 2009 list had Bubble Boy on there, which was probably undeserving.
That's all right. We like what we like, Brian. You know?
The heart wants what the heart wants.
Disenchanted 2022. Is it good?
I will say it is good. I'm going to give this just into the positive territory. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 8, which we term good. I was pleasantly surprised by how it came together. It's definitely not on par with the original, but for something that was straight to Disney Plus, whatever its origins, I appreciated it. I actually ended up overall thumbs-upping the fact that this was made. What are you thinking?
So I watched this movie in 2022 and I wrote a review of it on thegoodsreviews.com. I did also watch it again today. I second screened it while I was at work, so it wasn't my most attentive watch. I dipped in and out of it a little bit, but I'm going to give this a 4, good-ish. I kind of waffled between 3, 4, 5 as it goes through. There are parts of it I like, parts of it where I'm just annoyed it exists, and parts of it where it's just fine. And I'm going to land on it's just fine. It's good-ish. It's not quite good. It's definitely not the worst case scenario. It's definitely not something that you're like, oh my God, they ingeniously revisited the themes of the first film. I mean, there's moments where you're like, okay, this is clever. But a lot of it is just like, okay, they made something and that's fine. And they made it. And I'm a little sad that they undid the neatness of the first ending. But, you know, it's fine. So, yeah. There we go. It's those are our movies. And Brian, I haven't said it yet. I would consider this a very special episode, but I think next week is going to be an even more very specialer episode. And what are we doing next week?
Yeah, so like Amy Adams, Patrick Dempsey, and everybody else on the planet, we're all getting older as the days pass. We are, as we sit down here today, 3 days out from my birthday. I'm going to be 35, so we've lined up, as we always do, a birthday episode. And what I was thinking we would watch, Dan, is I wanted to talk about some movies that I have seen in the theater on my birthday. So usually it's stuff left over from the Christmas releases, stuff that has lingered on. Not a lot new in January, and if there is, it's kind of a dumping ground for the industry. The 2 official picks that I want to assign are Big Fish from Tim Burton and also Beowulf from Robert Zemeckis. So I think that's what we're gonna go with. Those 2.
Alrighty. I have seen Beowulf, but I have not seen Big Fish, and it's more Burton. I'm always game for revisiting Burton.
Yeah, if you wanted, I think you did bring this series up recently. If you wanted to tack on one more, because I know in the past we've tackled, like, the Spy Kids trilogy on my birthday, and you just went crazy watching the whole filmography of Rodriguez. But if you wanted to watch one more, Another that falls into this basket is the Series of Unfortunate Events movie with Jim Carrey.
Okay.
Would you feel like that?
I'll see. I think we can probably make it happen, but we'll see. So, cool. All right, Brian, thank you very much for this, and happy birthday. Well, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that next episode, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, listeners, and we will talk soon when we reconvene for episode 197. The bicentennial is coming soon.